Part 2, Andante. Well, dear readers, what of the two figures immortalized in the painting up for discussion in the hall shot through by slices of sunlight? It was based on drawings made by a young man who shared the Trapper's Road with a young couple 160 years ago. The young man filled handmade, hide-wrapped journals with charcoal sketches. Later, an eager freelance magazine illustrator encountered the drawings while preparing for a historical publication, and being so taken by the intimate expressions on the faces, he rendered many oil paintings of the two. The similar images in series showed the shades of relational meaning on their expressive faces. Together, the paintings were like an animated flipbook. Inevitably, the series attracted the attention of a film studies professor at the University of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Let us hasten back in history and join the young couple on their journey. Her father favored his mother, Susanna, in the hands and face. They looked out at the world, known by their serene, balanced features. They communicated through their poise and posture and effortless grace, as if their movements were edged with sunlit mist, and passed down their moderate temperament through the generations. These natural gifts of the face were matched with muscular hands at the ends of thick, powerful wrists, connected under the button cuffs to arms not easily twisted. Her father's hands and face together spoke well for him with his friends, before congregations, at the bar, and in negotiations. She favored her father's mother, who'd have been very proud of her granddaughter and her husband on the fine, bright, late winter morning in question. Her grandmother had been enthralled by the exploits of Lewis and Clark, alive with anticipation for the exciting lives her children and grandchildren would inherit. While she enjoyed the celebrity gossip among intellectual friends and acquaintances shortly after the death of Mary Wollstonecraft, in the years after she'd read many of her works. She'd read Frankenstein together with her little granddaughter in pigtails. Her mother would be horrified to see her hollow-cheeked daughter warming her face in the sun 3,000 miles to the west. She would hear nothing of her daughter's wanderlust when she had the chance. When she spoke to her mother regarding her feelings, it was as if her breath carrying the fragile words was tainted with the rebellious grime of an adventuress's debauched insanity. Her mother comforted herself by speaking over or about her to her face, saying she was a lovely girl misguided by hubris and youthful histrionics. They had their most heated discussion on the matter in the kitchen late the previous winter, driving out the damp, bone-chilling cold by attempting to make the very ostentatious and trendy lemon meringue pie. They were having a party the next evening, and she was expected to play an oboe piece by Haydn for the assembled guests. The argument began when her mother compared a woman's ambitions to the whipping of air into the sugary egg whites. She said it was a fragile concoction that would break and fall if overworked. She said it would shrink into a rubbery mess if overheated. Her mother was not swayed by the argument that humankind could not have covered every soon-to-be-known corner of the globe if women were not as fellow able-bodied humans along every step of the long and winding ways. If you can call living like heathens a life worth the dignity of living, she spat. Hearing her mother's hopeless tone, she held her tongue from deploying what she thought was her best argument. Instead, she quietly listened to it in her head. Mama, have you not considered all the many generations of Negro women who have crossed the ocean to these hostile lands, suffered the most horrible brutalities, and despite, for hundreds of years, have risen and continue to rise through it all, proving they are some pumpkins? It was easier to take her mother's words and advice as true for her, adding a healthy pinch of salt to the yellow custard. It was better to protect her sovereignty, intentions, and hidden preparations to hightail it away. The last thing she said was, Mama, you may not entertain the debate, but Mother Nature surely knows the truth of what womankind can do. Oh, my sweetest heart, if that does not sound like some humbug straight out of the mouth of my mother-in-law, a woman who loves to valorize the expeditions and refuses to acknowledge the misadventures. Gathering Princess Jaja, her little teacup terrier, into her arms, she retreated as the pie went into the blazing hot oven. She hoped her family wouldn't suspect she'd run off into the wild blue west because she took her little princess with her. She hoped they'd be thinking she was living somewhere in the guise of a proper lady in St. Louis, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, at worst just seeing the elephants. Maybe she's just trying her hand at working as a seamstress or stenographer. She had always pined on about being independent. Her mother would surely be saying these things to mollify her father, she hoped. She imagined her mother telling her father she must have been hoodwinked by the hyperbole of a con man, lured into a brief destiny of love or fame. Even in that case, she knew they knew she had a strong work ethic, and like a cat with a teacup terrier in her pocket, she came from a hardy stock that knew how to land on their feet. They'd expect her to come to her senses and come home, perhaps with a dirty hem, a little worse for wear, but wearing it well. Even so, her father hired and dispatched several henchmen to visit St. Louis, New York, Philadelphia, and Boston to hunt for her. It was much easier to hide the hands It was much easier to hide the face than the hands out under the relentless ultraviolence of the high desert sun. All manner of weather barreled down the hollows of the northwestern valley, and anyone out and about would have their faces covered. She wore a handkerchief, wedged her head into a well-fitted hat over her cropped hair, and several layers of leather everywhere else to fend off the barbs and blades of the prairie grass. Her knee-length leather trapper's jacket was padded out to impersonate a more manly form, but beautifully embellished with embroidered red stars and trimmed with a fringed three-layer cape. There were spiked and star spurs of grass seeds that would catch, twist, and burrow into any open skin, aggressive to get established and rooted, ready to conquer you and consume you into the landscape. Princess Jaja stayed tucked in her coat breast. She was always helping to be on the lookout for coyotes shadowing them. On the occasions when they'd come into camps, settlements, towns, and villages to transact, Jaja's big bark would do all the talking. No one took too hard a look at her covered face, but at her meaty knuckles rubbing the chin of her little hillbilly foil. When the couple rode away side by side, with her face and body completely covered, her pair of sturdy hands, even gloved, had spoken for themselves, saying to anyone who cared to mind their own business, "There goes a fellow riding out in the morning together with his friend to greet the day." Hanover, Pennsylvania, a long, prosperous town at the intersection of two major roads, 14 miles east of Gettysburg, 100 miles west of Philadelphia, had also been the home of her new husband. He was the son of the town's best dentist, himself an outdoor enthusiast and botanical hobbyist. His particular passion was herpetology. He trained his son in bushcraft in the back country of the Pocono Mountains, attentively studying the life cycles of the indigenous salamanders. They made many journeys through the late winter snow to be present beside muddy-eyed ponds as bright orange F's emerged into the world of cliffs and waterfalls. Her father had gone to his father to have a molar pulled the day before the start of a trial. It was a terribly hot summer day. The mosquitoes were unbearable. Rather than walk about, his daughter had waited for him in the office parlor, under the blue ceiling painted with metallic stars, falling in love at first sight with the doctor's son. Her mother did not approve of his family's passionate dispositions, accusing them of being outlaws by nature, unfit as in-laws. Subsequently, she enlisted the out-of-town cousin of a neighbor of a friend who lived in Taneytown, 15 miles across the state line in Maryland, to stage a subterfuge. The young man found himself accused of horse theft. His father came to her father to exonerate her future husband when he was fallaciously accused. Perhaps her father never knew his wife's part in the business. His daughter surely did, as her mother bragged about profiting from the sabotage, simultaneously indulging her sadistic lust for power and control as she watched the anguish pass over her daughter's face. Composing herself as quickly as possible, she tried to argue her mother's ruthless cunning was surely evidence supporting the position that women deserved a proper education, to employ their natural gifts and intellects to less petty and devious purposes. With his reputation damaged, the young man was sent away to school in Boston. Before departing, he gave the young daughter of his lawyer a bust stay with an intricate panoramic vista he'd carved in relief. It depicted the sun or moon looming in a valley between mountains bisected by two waterways, with trees marching down to the banks of the outer edge of the picture. She kept it in the little center pocket of her stay, along with letters they sent back and forth by way of a mutual friend. Their clandestine attraction matured over the autumn and winter into a full-fledged plan of elopement and escape. They decided to absquatulate into the slow dwindling hours of the afternoon as the meringue pie rested, so they would have the cover of darkness to get as far along on their journey as possible. Ostensibly, she headed out on a legitimate errand, giggling inside to think how slowly the crevices of the town would be searched in the dark, until they would give up to look better by the light of day. In fact, the young couple headed northwest by dawn had covered 30 miles, arriving at the home of his friend, Daniel Kaufman, in Boiling Springs, just south of Carlisle. The two young men were kindred spirits, philosophical and pragmatic. Daniel had developed his plan for use of a little stone shack on the edge of his farm, by a stream running through the forest, in conversation with his friend, and they sheltered there the first day of their life together. The next travelers to arrive, the night the lovers left, were freedom seekers headed north to Canada, some of the first of many to come in the next few years. Humbled to tears by their privilege, but still anxious they were being hounded, they traveled by night on horseback, riding 200 miles in 5 days to Elmira, New York, where they took one of the first canal boats of the season along the Chemung Canal, which had only just been completed the previous year. From Seneca Lake to the Cayuga and Seneca canals, also just completed, their sense of urgency to vanish disappeared. By the time they arrived at the Erie Canal in Montezuma, they felt truly on the brink of the future and parts unknown, hand in hand, knowing and known only to each other. They married in Buffalo and boarded the steamboat as husband and wife across Lake Erie to Chicago. They'd left at the earliest signs of change from winter to spring, so they could stand at the front of the boat and watch the lake ice breaking on the bow. The frontier would not be so for very much longer. They firmly believed they needed to get out there, not just out of here, while the getting was still good, having no firm plan other than on 3 horses. They could not have imagined anything about the many thousands of miles ahead, waiting in the grip of winter to be bathed in the intoxicating scent of sun-warmed sagebrush. They had the good fortune to meet and travel with a trapper named Wilson, leaving out of Illinois. He felt keenly pressured to travel deep and far into the interior of the continent, as competition in the regional territories had greatly increased in recent years. He had traveled in prior seasons with a heroic mountain man named Jedediah Smith, one of Ashley's hundreds, before he'd been killed the previous year in the territory of Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico. Swift and Wilson had traveled together all the way along the South Pass, through the high desert country where the Wind River twisted the cedars, firs, and junipers into stunted and fantastical poses. They'd hidden their clutches of pelts and supplies in the crevices of the sandstone castles of Cache Valley, under the hoodoos and watchful faces of petroglyph spirits, who choose when and to whom they'd reveal themselves. They traversed the scoop of the Great Basin desert like ghosts, the meadows of tiny, bursting technicolor buckwheat flowers, foraged by butterflies, bees, and migrating hummingbirds. They'd trusted each other's hesitant discernment about where to dig themselves in and hunker down as a massive haboob ravaged the mountains and valleys, waiting with good humor as the giant wall of dust passed, pushed by thunderstorms across the plain. The wind and rains diligently worked one surface at a time, as if composed by a manic artist with too many works in progress. Impetuous thunderstorms battered themselves against the cliffs and escarpments, sending torrents of wet rubble down in flash floods. The elements polished and refined each canyon wall into distinct individuals, seemingly homogeneous from a distance, but home to flora and fauna unique from one valley to another. Their dreams were swept up by the whispers of moths into the ever-expanding panoply of stardust and vibrant constellations above the pitch blackness of night over the arid land. Wilson orbited the young couple as they traced the routes of the First Nations through the warrens and rock gardens of Canyonland, threaded by blue ribbons of turquoise. He guided their journey as he trapped through the seasons. Together they surmounted the peaks by way of switchback trails, flanked by enormous ponderosa pines in the Sierra Nevadas before the heavy snows fell, seeing the still reflections of the trees behind their eyes in the waters at the edge of Dawo, Lake Tahoe. Musical songs of migrating birds surfing in flight through the winds created a disorienting Doppler effect. The gait of her horse was hypnotic. As they rotated around the bushy, needled branches of the towering pines, she was haunted by visions of extravagant bustled gowns, turning the trees into dancers in an enchanted forest ballroom. In the quickening light after the solstice, the young couple sat on the edge of a small, snow-fed pond in the southernmost elevations of the Cascade Mountain Range, in the northernmost part of a great valley in what would too soon come to be known as California. A boiling kettle of juvenile white and gray gulls harassed one another for hovering positions, reflecting the layered purple hues of mountains beyond mountains off the shallow waters, bringing the white peaks alive through the up and down jostling of the birds. The shadow dancing of their bodies dragged the colors across the snow and looked to her like the sheet music of Haydn's oboe concerto in C major she'd been practicing before they left the East. She sat quietly listening to the overlapping ensemble of frogs, fighting off the cold by singing for their lives at the water's edge. She heard the swooping rises and hyperventilating trills of the Allegro spirituoso solo. Her imagination was haunted by the terrible loneliness of those hours spent practicing alone, those precious hours of her short life, virtuosity utterly wasted for nothing and for no one. The squawking gulls must have brought down the lonely spirit of a monstrous snow giant from the still and silent peaks on their wings. Broken reflections on the water swam in her eyes as hot tears pulled from deep in her throat, rolling down her dirty cheeks. I think our planning of this journey was perfectly timed. Fur hats falling out of fashion, we are not likely to be followed all this long way, and there will be much less competition against us trying our hands in this oncoming season. We made it, my darling, her husband began to say. He squeezed her hand, looking to her tenderly. He pulled his glove off with his teeth, fingering the steam coming off her hot, wet face. He said, "The years will surely be too few before the trappings of civilization catch up to us, and I will find myself putting a string of pearls around your handsome neck, my love." Emotion welled in his eyes, and he kissed hers, his dry lips stung by her wet tears. "I will cherish these days between us, lacing these strings of trailing embers from our campfires into the parade of stars above us, all the more when those decades come, when we sit listening to a private orchestra of crickets in the night. I relish this, being consumed hand in hand with you as the plots of our journeys unfold. I could not share a greater promise with you than this stringing of vignettes in which we are led. This adventurous honeymoon is the greatest blessing a man could ever receive from God Almighty, in heaven above and here on this wild earth as it is in heaven. Consuming hand to mouth the raw, majestic indifference of this beautiful world is my prayers answered. I feel consumed, profoundly nourished by our love in all corners of my heart. My body is warmed to the core against all chills, growing fonder as each moment passes. Thank you, my love. Thank you for being here, in this very moment, together with me." He turned his attention back to a set of poached eggs simmering in the skillet over the hissing fire. "Darling," she replied after digesting his romantic poetry, "do you remember the morning when we opened our tent to see everything shrouded in hoarfrost? We could not see any further than the silhouettes of the leafless trees' contorted branches. The birds gripped the twigs singing so bravely, and we searched together to discover faces and figures in the haze to pass the time. How the shapes of the trees did appear swept in such elegant curves by the wind over the ridge. The dormant, brittle grasses bloomed with ice crystals. That could have been the last day of my life, and I would have died so happy and content." She bowed her head, kissing the top of his hand. The first of 2 major railroads were being completed and put into service as they sat and spoke. Perhaps if the people back east hadn't become distracted, embroiled in the delusional ideology of greed, the gruesome war, the rail lines would have chased them down sooner. However, a few short years and millions dead later, the lines did march across the country and track them down. While the flood of travel east to west united the feelings of the nation, as it united the young couple in feeling, all beauty and nuance of locales was obliterated. Our 2 travelers, once found and folded back into the blinding whiteness of society, were ghosts to themselves, never anyone or anywhere. The coming of interstate highways was swift, perhaps inevitable, and shrouded the land from seas to shining seas in a smothering uniformity. The distinction and beauty of places was destroyed by reckless exploitation, and the pockets that remained turned into attractions to delude the citizenry that they were not impoverished and immoral. The Pacific Highway would be built in fewer than 100 years. It would terminate practically on top of them if they'd stayed sitting there, drinking in the humid musk rising from the land, warming in the late morning sun. Soon there would be homesteads, followed by hotels with false fronts mimicking the ostentatious styles of where the travelers had come. Soon the hotels would be sporting the old-timey rustic style of the flagship venues, but have neon signs and truck parking out back. The people these young lovers took the chance to be, and had the chance to encounter, became like a death, laid down in the soft brown earth, the grasses paved by asphalt to carry the rumble that obliterated all sound. No yesterday, no tomorrow, life and time forgotten, impossible.